Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time with our good friend, Dr. Meg Meeker. We're going to talk about how to raise a strong daughter in a toxic culture. And we have talked with her before. Matter of fact, probably best known for her best-selling book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. Dr. Meg Meeker has her medical degree and has been a practicing pediatrician for more than 30 years. Serves on the advisory board of the Medical Institute. We'll talk about that. It's one of the reasons she happens to be in town with us at the moment. Professor of medicine at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine, and author of other books, and just has been a good friend to Point of View all these years. But it's been so long, so it is great to have you in studio today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, Kerby.
You bring a lot to the table because, first of all, as a desire to be a good mother, which you are, a desire to be a great pediatrician, which you are, and also a great writer, you've helped us with these issues. And we found out that you were going to be in a program, and matter of fact, you and I both had a chance to speak at it today over at the Bush Library, that your new book is just out, and it is a new book, Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture, 11 Steps to Keep Her Healthy, Happy, and Safe. And, of course, author of many other books in that regard. And we have information about her on her website. We have information about this book. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but it's just out. So, you know, you might have to tell the book seller there to make sure they order copies of it. But if not, we've got a place where you can order it on hardback and Kindle. But let's give you a little bit of the background as well. It's been a while since we've had you on, because you've had a real heart for looking at what is happening to our daughters with bullying, sexually transmitted diseases, broken homes, a lack of father influence. Mm-hmm. These are just a few things that you have written about over the years, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, and I learned very early on after I came out of residency, if I really wanted to help kids, I had to help their parents. Because if I encouraged their parents enough, taught them enough, then the kids were fine. I didn't have to worry about them. But, you know, really, I came at writing not because I wanted to write books, but it just sort of happened because I began speaking out early on about issues that I saw kids coming up against. You know, the hypersexualization of our culture. It really bothered me that this was having such a profound effect on kids. And really, over the past 10 years, I've seen an acceleration of the tough issues that are coming at particularly girls. You know, anxiety, depression, social media, parents writing and saying, when should my daughter have a cell phone? When should she not? So I've also sensed this sort of angst amongst parents. They don't know how to handle a lot of issues their daughter's up against. So that's really why I wrote the book, to help them navigate a really tough culture on their daughters.
And a lot of people might say, well, why just daughters? Well, again, I think both boys and girls face this, but daughters and girls face a lot more. They are affected much more profoundly by STDs than boys are by a lot. They are much more likely to be affected by body image issues, which is one of the chapters in the book. Girls, let's be honest, sometimes can be more catty, so they can sometimes be more affected by cyberbullying.
Yes.
Which, you know, when you and I were growing up, we didn't have cell phones. So that wasn't even an issue. That wasn't probably something you talked about in medical school, but I bet they talk about it now. So in some respects, the girls, and especially these daughters, face issues that are really almost unprecedented in our Western culture.
Yeah, they are unprecedented. And, you know, I routinely ask teenage girls and younger, what are the biggest struggles that you have in your life? And without skipping a beat, they say being thin, looking pretty, and being sexually active, because they believe that by the time they graduate high school, it's a done deal. So many of them just want to do it and get it over with, which is really sad
It is
to me.
sad. So sad.
Because, you know, their identity, their sense of value, they really kind of don't know where it comes from, even Christian kids. And so that's why I said, parents, we need to take our kids deeper. We need to take our daughters deeper. And you're absolutely right. I wrote about daughters just because I wanted to just focus on daughters. I did write a book on boys, but I really wrote about this very close to my heart because I see a lot of teen girls.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I can appreciate that. I've got 2 daughters and a granddaughter. And so I'm already recognizing what my daughters have been through. My granddaughter's going through things that even my daughters have not been through. And early on in the book, you talk about knowing her heart and answering her questions.
Yeah.
That's, in some respects, what you're trying to do is, even though I think young girls can read this and will benefit, this really is for dad and mom,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. Or grandma and grandpa.
Yes.
And here's why I started off with those 2 things, because I think as parents, this is the parents' MO, is that I feel I need to get my kids, my daughter, really good at stuff. You know, ballet. I want to get her grades good. I want her to play soccer as well or better than my friends' daughters. So we fall into this trap of wanting to get our kids to perform really well,
Right.
to help them have a great portfolio so they go into the best college and so on and so forth. But we're really missing the ball here, dropping the ball. And Christian parents do the exact same thing. We feel more peer pressure than the kids do. And what we end up doing is, how many times have you heard a young mother say, oh, my 3-year-old is reading. Can you believe she's reading? She's smarter than her friends. Or 5-year-old, so good at gymnastics. Or, you know, she's writing her letters and none of the kids in her class are writing her letters. So we get our kids very competitive early on about the stuff they do. But kids see right through that. They want to know, why am I alive?
Yeah.
And if we don't answer those questions, we set our daughters up for falling prey to a lot of the ills that come at them junior high and high school.
And early on, you talk about those 4 questions, you know, who am I, my value, my significance, and all sorts of things, and even my purpose. And so those are kind of good spiritual questions that we ask so often around here as well. But I was thinking, even as you go through the book, you've got 11 chapters, 11 steps, 200 pages. By the way, I might just mention it's published by Regnery. Look for it again in your local bookstore. But even so, since it's just come out, it may not be there yet. And so we've given you an opportunity to find out a little bit more. But it also brings us back to, when we look at those 4 questions, some of the kinds of things about even whether or not there's right and wrong. That was one of the things I talked about today.
Yeah.
Does morality exist? They're growing up in a world that says, well, you have your view of truth and I have my view of truth, and they have a different view of truth. You have your ethics and I have my ethics. And unless we put that straight forward, they're going to say, well, my peers are all sexually active. Why shouldn't I be sexually active? Right?
Exactly. And I think that kids who are growing up, particularly daughters, growing up in a culture where they don't know if there's right or wrong, but their instincts are telling them there is a right and wrong. If you watch a 9-month-old hit her dog over the head with a toy and then look at her face, she knows she did something bad. So it's in us. God puts it in us. But then as a girl grows older and she begins to question and do things, but nobody's telling her if it's good or bad, right or wrong, you know, is there evil and is there good? She's very confused. She feels very lost,
right.
And she feels a little bit crazy. And yet parents don't want to say this is right and this is wrong because they don't want her to go into school and make those comments and be ostracized by her friends or her teacher. So again, parents are afraid to do the wrong thing, so they back out. But girls want a moral standard. They really want a moral standard. They want boundaries. They want to know how they should live, what's the best thing to do, and what's a bad thing to do.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about what can moms do and what can dads do. Both of those are very important. Then we'll get into some of these very difficult issues, but some of that issue of boundaries comes back to being a parent. I know, real concept. Parents acting like parents. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Dr. Meg Meeker as we talk about this new book, Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The slogan, defund the police, has done great damage. Byron York took the time to talk about the political implications of this slogan and also document the real-world cost of the phrase. For months, the phrase defund the police was repeated at every protest and riot. As we got closer to the general election, some Democratic candidates started getting nervous, fearing that the slogan would hurt them politically. That is why they tried to redefine the term by telling us that defund the police merely meant that some funds for the police would be redirected to programs for mental health treatment and affordable housing. The problem for these politicians is that progressives in their party wouldn't let them redefine the term. For example, an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times had the headline, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police." As I mentioned in previous commentaries, many Democrats in Congress have been criticizing other progressives, saying that the slogan nearly cost them their reelection. Many who lost in November no doubt also believe they lost because of the phrase, defund the police. But the political cost is small compared to the loss of life. One story from Minneapolis found that homicides are up 50%. More than 500 people have been shot, the highest number in more than a decade, and twice as many as in 2019, and there have been more than 4,600 violent crimes. You might remember on June 26th, the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to abolish the city's police department. More than 100 police officers retired, and now the city council has had to provide $500,000 in emergency funding to hire temporary officers to get the city through the end of the year. These are just some of the horrible cost of the defund the police slogan. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Meg Meeker. A little bit later, we might open up the phones to give you a chance to ask the question, but I wanted you to hear from her first. Dr. Meeker, I know what happens every time you're on the program, though. People say, why can't I have her as my kid's pediatrician or my grandkid's pediatrician? But you've got a chapter here on mothers and daughters. So let's talk about mom first. Mentor, ally, glue. Let's talk about the role of a mom to these teenage daughters growing up in a toxic culture.
Well, mother has a huge influence over daughters, of course. And, you know, before I talk about that, I want to encourage parents in one thing. As influential as our culture is, nothing compares to the influence and power of parents.
Right.
So mom needs to understand, particularly single mothers, that she has an enormous power and influence in her daughter's life. Mom is a mentor. Mom is the one who shows her how to live as a strong woman. Mom is the one who teaches her how to set boundaries, how to say no. You know, mom is the one who shows her how to talk to people, how to be a friend to people, how to speak to your husband. And so it's really important. Mothers become afraid with feeling that they don't want to do something to push their daughters away. They want to always keep lines of communication open with their daughters. And that's where sometimes they fall into being a friend up here. If I keep talking with you on your level and I sort of insert myself in your group of friends, I'll know what's going on and I'll be able to communicate with you. But don't do that. Girls need a mentor.
Yes.
They don't need another friend. And being a mentor means that you have to act and be much older than she is. And girls want this. Girls feel a little creepy when mom is in her group of friends.
Just a Facebook friend and hanging out with all the girls.
Don't. You know, one of the rules of good mothering is don't write on your girl's Facebook and don't wear her jeans.
And don't embarrass her.
No,
Yeah.
buy a pair of mom jeans.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that mothers
So
pride
good.
themselves
So good.
on is, oh, I can wear my daughter's clothes. You know, daughters don't like that. Give her her day.
Right.
Let her be because when you do that, you become her competition in her mind. And she doesn't like that. So you separate yourself a bit, not emotionally, but in a sense that you're the wise, mature one, and you're going to have to show her how to live because she will mimic you and she doesn't want you to be her buddy. There are times to be a good friend of your daughter, but you have to wait till she's 25.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that again because we do a millennial roundtable where I'm the old guy, or sometimes all the millennials run without me. And one of the things we're seeing is some parents not only are trying to be your buddy, but they're snowplow parents, they're helicopter parents. We have some moms going to jail because they tried to get their kids into schools through illegal activities. So that's an extreme example, but it does seem to me that sometimes you, as a mother, have to let your child, your daughter, make a bad decision and fail, but hopefully not fail in a way that's going to destroy your life, but learn some lessons to make wise decisions in the future.
Absolutely. But I think that parents don't want to let their kids fail because they're so focused on having their kids be successful.
Yes.
And being successful means winning at everything. But that really sets a kid up for failure. They don't learn resilience. I think one of these phenomenons we're seeing, helicopter parents and snowplow parents, is that parents are communicating to their kids, I need to do this for you. Not, I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm not going to mentor you. I'm going to do it for you. And that comes out of a need the mother has to feel needed by her kids. That's why we have kids who won't leave home in their 20s. And parents ask me, I can't get my son to leave home. He's on the couch. I said, well, are you doing his laundry? Are you cooking? Well, yeah, because he needs me to. You know, he doesn't.
Failure to launch.
And that's a very hard thing for a lot of mothers, particularly single mothers, to reconcile. My kids don't need me anymore. They need you in some ways, but it's very different. This is particularly harmful to boys because a boy can't be a man unless his mother said, you don't really need me anymore.
Yeah.
Now he'll come back to you, but particularly for daughters too, we cannot let them feel like they need us to do something for them. That's the way they feel, incapable. They feel kind of like a victim. They feel like everybody needs to jump around me rather than digging deep inside and saying, this is what I can do. These are the boundaries I can set. This is how I can complete my college application, get there on my own.
Yeah. And so, again, just a good illustration of what moms need to do. So many more things in that chapter. I want to move on, though, to dads, because if there's one thing you've written about, strong fathers, strong daughters. And I would have to say, as a father, I recognized from two individuals, Jim Dobson and Meg Meeker, how important a father is to the daughters. Because sometimes you think, well, that's just the girl's issue, but that's your first love. You're the protector, right?
Yes.
And you even talk about the fact that you're also the leader. So those are some of the principles in that chapter, right?
Yeah. A lot of words that are politically very incorrect, but I don't care because my job is to speak for kids, to say the things they can't. A dad is a daughter's first love, first male love. And dads go, oh, that's kind of scary. But think about it. You know, when a daughter's born, she recognizes immediately the difference between her dad and her mother. He smells different, feels different, sounds different. And there's a sense of protection that she gets from him. Dad teaches a daughter how to relate to men and boys, her brother, her pastor, her teachers, her boyfriends. And if she learns to trust and love her dad, he sets a template for how she should expect other men to behave towards her, boys to behave towards her. So he's hugely important. For the Christian, think about this. If a daughter has a great relationship with her father, she's going to be much more open to having a good relationship with God the Father. And I've seen girls who've been abused by their dads who want nothing to do with God.
Very true.
I don't want anything that has to do with Father. And so dads have a very unique role in a daughter's life. This is interesting. I've heard a lot of daughters say, because they treat their mothers and their fathers very differently. If mom says something, oh, you did so well in school and I'm so proud of you, daughters go, yeah. And the reason they do that is they expect their mother to say that because mom is the constant.
Right.
Mom can't leave. Mom is mom. But when dad says,
Oh, boy.
oh, you did something well, they think, wow, I
did
really
well.
did something well. It's not because they love dad more, but in their mind, dad doesn't have to say those things. He can choose to say those things, but he's not mom. And it's very unusual. You know, parents have a hard time wrapping their minds around that, but that's what kids tell me. So dads have a power in a daughter's life that a mother doesn't. It's not better, it's not worse. But it's very important in our culture where we say, you know, a mom is a dad and a dad is a mom, and it really doesn't matter. It matters to kids. And it matters hugely to kids. And kids need that complementary relationship where mom brings something to the table and dad brings something to the table. And interestingly, all the research bears this out. Secular research, it just is full of this is what how dad can influence a daughter. Here's how mom can influence a daughter. But when you come to media and the public eye, they say, oh, no, that's not true. But it is true.
It really is. And again, you notice that even in the phraseology, I'll hear a lot of girls say mother and daddy. You know, it's not mommy and daddy, it's mother and daddy. And another aspect of that as well is we've said, you know, as we're going to get into sexual transmitted diseases after the break and things like that, a girl may be more likely to be sexually promiscuous if I'm looking for some kind of love from a male. And if I don't get it from my father, I'm going to maybe get it somewhere else. Now, that's not always the case. And again, we'll be politically incorrect on some of these points, but I think it is really helpful. But we need to take a break. And again, the book is entitled Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture, 11 Steps to Keep Her Happy, Healthy, and Safe. And 11 chapters, about 200 pages, published by our friends at Regnery Publishing. And if you'd like to know more about Meg Meeker, simply go to the website, click on her picture there, and as you do so, you will see that will take you to the website, meekerparenting.com. Meeker with 2 E's. And when we come back, we'll talk about, what about those screens? You know, we've talked about this whole idea of young people, especially young girls, spending entirely too much time in front of a screen. And it could be a computer screen. It could certainly be our cell phones and things like that. And then some of these other great challenges, whether it's sexually transmitted diseases, whether it's the issue of body image, and a great deal of others. So if you would like to join our conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But let me, as we go to a break, encourage you to go to meekerparenting.com. We come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a blog, there's a podcast, there's resources. If you'd like to have Dr. Meeker come and speak to your particular group, or you'd like to know more about her books, including this one, Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture, well, that's all information that we're making available to you as well. And so if you would like to know a little bit more about that, we'll also get into some other toxic issues. We haven't talked about toxic feminism, and I usually leave that for you and Penna Dexter, but I think we'll get into that one too. So just a lot of topics that we have on the website, so feel free to go to pointofview.net. And just before we take a break, let me just mention that if you find yourself saying, so it's really good, I would like to hear it again, or you'd like to pass it on to someone, click on that button that says listen. We have a podcast, or click on the button that says watch, because then you could pass it on to someone and watch the interview as she is in studio with us. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Meg Meeker, right after this.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us, Dr. Meg Meeker, as we talk about raising a strong daughter in a toxic culture, 11 steps to keep her happy, healthy, and safe. A lot of other difficult issues. Let's just jump right into them. And one of those, of course, is this idea of screens. Yeah. Young people that never before maybe felt bullied could feel bullied. Young people before who wouldn't be preoccupied by anything other than maybe having their nose in a book. Now they are actually being so influenced by their cell phones, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we think of boys being addicted to video games and boys being addicted to all sorts of things. But the reality is girls can be equally addicted to social media. Why is social media so addictive? Why does it draw girls? Because girls want to know, A, what their friends are doing. They don't want to miss out on anything.
Right.
And they also want affirmation that they're good and okay and their friends like them. But the problem is it never satisfies. So they go longer and longer and longer to get a lot of likes or to hear people say, oh, yes, that's so great. They also compare themselves to other people.
Yes.
And, social media is really a show-off zone. It just is. Because everybody puts their best foot forward.
The highlight reel. Yeah.
Yes. And it ultimately makes girls feel very bad about themselves. We also know, and I don't mean to scare parents, but we need to know what's happening so that you can win, so that you can raise a strong daughter, which you absolutely can, is that social media, the amount of time that a girl spends on social media is directly related to her risk of being depressed. I've seen this. I've lived it out with the girls in my practice. And some of them say, I just can't stop. I had a beautiful 17-year-old girl a year ago come in and just released from the hospital a week and swallowed a bottle of Tylenol. Beautiful. And she said, I just feel so badly about myself, and really depression's about self-loathing. And she divulged that a lot of it was fueled, her depression was fueled by social media. And I said, well, okay, one of the things we need to treat you for your depression is to back you off. And she said, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I mean, she was so drawn to it. So it's really, really dangerous for girls. And a lot of parents say, well, my daughter's a straight A student. She's 16. I can trust her. No, you can't, because she's young and kids don't have the ability to regulate time on social media. So that's where parents need to come in and say, okay, I'm going to help you. Now, social media is here to stay. Phones are here to stay. So here's how I can help you begin to dial down on it.
Yeah. And again, those are some very important issues. Like you said, FOMO, fear of missing out, I should say, as well as just the whole comparison idea. And you see these young people today that are just almost suicidal because of that. And we are talking more and more every day, Dr. Meeker, about the deaths of despair, drug overdoses, alcohol abuse, suicides, and all the rest, which are just rampant at a time when, from an economic point of view, we're doing pretty well. Yeah. We have peace and prosperity, and more young people are really diving into some areas of despair. So that's one of those issues. But another one you talk about, since I'm going to keep it moving since you have 11, is this idea of toxic feminism, because that is something you've addressed for some time. And it is, again, one of the chapters in your book and something that is also part of a toxic culture, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that women have set other women and girls up for failure in many ways. You know, the feminist movement began by saying, we want all the professional rights of men. We want to do as well as they do. We want equal opportunities. And then we plowed through that. And then we said we can be, perfect mothers and we can be perfect, professionals. And then we plowed through that and it didn't work, of course. And now we have sort of morphed to the point where we're really fighting men. There's a huge divide between men and women. I mean, we're politically very divided, but particularly with the Me Too movement, it began with great intent, but then it morphed into something like, you know what? All men are potential perpetrators. You can't trust any man, and we see this anti-father movement in the country. Mm-hmm. Find an advertisement or television show where the father looks smart.
Yeah.
He doesn't. And this is devastating to our girls. So I talk about toxic feminism taking girls in a direction where they end up competing with and hating men. that hurts them, it hurts their kids. So then I talk about how to really teach your daughters to be strong and not hate men, to like who they are, to be strong in their femininity. And there's a wide range of how you can be, what femininity really looks like. And so I'm really trying to bring it back and to help teach daughters live from who they are and their strengths and their gifts, and to really be who God created them to be without bashing men.
Yes, and feel good about themselves. Like
exactly.
Back those questions you talk about early in the book.
Yeah, you can't feel good about yourself if you're focused on being angry to other people, angry to men. You know, God tells us that we shouldn't hold on to anger. We need to forgive. We need to be rid of it. So when you have any movement fueled by anger, it doesn't end well. And I think a lot of feminism, look at all the anti-Trump stuff. There are a lot of women who are coming out with just spewing venom. These are angry, angry women, not just at Trump, but at all men. Then also we've championed the single mother. We women don't need men.
Oh, yeah.
We don't need men. We don't need you to do any of this stuff because we can do everything. And that's why I say we really set girls up for failure, because we can't do everything. And the good news and bad news for a single mother is you can't be two people at once. That's the good news and the bad news. So just be a really good mom.
Yeah. And find maybe some man that's in the church that can provide some guidance there as well. Well, I just want to keep moving because you've just got so many great chapters. And one of those is the body image issue. We're talking about eating disorders, body image. This was, as far as I can tell, not a big issue in the 19th century, but boy, this shows how television and media have so devastated the self-image of a lot of young women, isn't it?
Yeah. Art really manipulates our beliefs and our view of the world and our view of ourselves. And I don't really want to call movies art. I guess it is. But if girls are being brainwashed to believe that their value, their significance, their acceptability to other people is in being thin. I routinely ask girls, what are the biggest struggles you have? And without skipping a beat, being skinny and being, sexually active. So it's a big deal. We have third graders. 30% of third graders feel like they should be on a diet. And I want to say something to mothers out there. Mothers feel this too. Mothers feel that they need to be thin. They need to lose that last 10 pounds from having a baby. They need to be at the gym, so on and so forth. And so mothers can really step in here and say, wait a minute, your value is not on how you look. And mothers need to example that, because one of the things mothers are constantly saying is, I just need to be on a diet. I need to be on a diet. Don't say that. Don't say that. And they think, well, this is a very harmless. It isn't harmless, because your daughter is believing that if you think it's really important to be thin and you feel it's important to lose 10 pounds, what about her? And so we really need to dial down on this as mothers and retrain the way we speak and the way we think about our value as much as our daughter's value, because we feel that way too.
Yeah. Oh, well, you mentioned it, feeling single. The pressure to be sexually involved. I mean, who would have guessed that?
Who would have
guessed?
Yeah. Who would have guessed?
That, I must be the only virgin in my high school graduation class or something like that.
Which is not true.
No,
because studies show it's at least 50% of the kids are not sexually active. And what I find in my practice is when I talk to them about delaying the sexual debut, and then why, they love it. Because kids need a reason not to be sexually active, because they believe it's an expectation that their friends have, the culture has, and we feed into that. I can't tell you how many mothers come in and say, well, my daughter's 16, she's not sexually active, but I don't want her to get pregnant. Christian mothers will say that. I just want to be safe, so put her on birth control. And I say, ma'am, pregnancy is not the problem. It's not the problem. Preventing pregnancy is pretty easy. But your daughter needs to abstain from sex because of this and this and this and this. Emotionally, it's very, very bad.
Oh, sure is. And one of the things that we've documented before in some of our books and resources and things like that is the incidence of young girls, even if they don't get an STD, even if they don't get pregnant, the rate of depression and the rate of suicide is much higher for sexually active young people. So there are just all sorts of good arguments for abstinence.
There's so many. But and I will say this. I find it easier to get through to the kids and convince the kids not to have sex than the parents.
I
And I think
agree.
here's why, because they either grew up through the sexual revolution or they were post-sexual revolution, and they believed that sexual freedom was a hard fought for right,
Yeah.
and that it's here to stay, and it isn't.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Meg Meeker. And if you have just joined us, the book is entitled Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture. It is published by Regnery. 11 Steps to Keep Her Happy, Healthy, and Safe. We probably haven't covered all the 11 chapters. We'll come back and talk about spiritual issues and a few other things right after these important messages. And if you find yourself wanting to know more about Meg Meeker, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us Dr. Meg Meeker. Let's take a phone call. If we head out to South Carolina, Randy, thank you for joining us today. What's your point of view?
Thank you. Hello. Hey. How you doing today?
Very good. What would you like to add?
Well, you finally hit on a subject that I think is important, and it's everyone has a role. Father has a role. Mom has a role. The kids have a role. And when we allow each of us to take that role, and hopefully the kids will follow that role. And one praise I can give is my son. He's 18. He's about ready to be 19. He's never had sex. He's never drank. He's never done drugs. And maybe he talked back to me, but That's his prerogative. But he hasn't done the things that have caused the problems in our community.
And, you know, I think that's kind of the point. We are really talking about if we set a good role model, and that could be a variety of different things. If you're always on your cell phone, your kids are going to say, well, that must be really important. And
Right.
so if you're always addicted to television, they're going to feel that as well. So there's a sense in which if everybody fills their role, that almost sounds like a biblical concept.
Biblical, surprise, surprise.
Works.
There's a family unit and everybody has a different function. And, you know, I love that because, you know, the title of the book sounds a little daunting in a toxic culture, but I am the most hopeful person. You know, I've been teaching absence of kids for 20 years, but, you know, it's working. And I know that every parent listening, moms and dads, is wired with exactly what they need to be a great parent, but they need to listen to their gut. They need to act on their instincts. I can't tell you how many times I have a parent say, you know, my 13-year-old daughter is going to a sleepover and they're going to show an R-rated movie and I really don't want her to go or see the movie. What should I do? It's, you just told me what you wanted. Yeah, I know, but she'll be, no, act on your instincts. So
Be a
many
parent.
parents, I don't want my daughter to have a cell phone until she's 14, but she's 10 and what should I do? Don't give her. So I think we really need to embolden parents because, like this gentleman who just called, if you do the right thing by your kids, they love it.
That's what they want.
And they will emerge on the other side so strong. And it, you know, great parenting is simple, but it's really hard.
Yes. Let's, if we can, talk about one other chapter, because obviously we are a Christian program, and you talk about rooting her faith in God. And we do see a number of young people, boys and girls, walk off from the church, walk off from the family, walk off from any kind of religious commitment. So what can we do there to root their faith in God?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, this is not a Christian book. It's a secular book.
Sure.
But my publisher gives me carte blanche to write whatever I want about Jesus. So I love it.
Which is good.
Yeah. Studies show that God is good for kids. Surprise, surprise. What can parents do? Parents, when your kids are young, you need to, and as they get older, you need to teach them scriptures. You need to teach them why the Bible is wonderful, why it's rich, why it's alive. Teach them how to read it. You need to teach them who Jesus is. What does he look like? What does he talk like? You need to be that example. One of the things that I found that millennials and iGen kids don't want is rules. Don't tell me all the rules. Tell me why I should love him and follow him. And if you do that, even when your kids are young, 10 and under, those are the roots that set deep. And one of the things that I found as kids get older and they walk away, most of them gravitate back towards what they know because they want to repeat what they know, not what they want. And, you know, those roots are so deep and so strong that they do come back. But it's crazy. It's so, you know, parents are so worried and anxious about their 25-year-olds will say, you know what, I don't believe what you believe. I'm going to go off and find something. You know, my son didn't say that, but he said, how do I know it's true? How do I know? I said, read as much as you can. So the first thing he did is he went out and bought Richard Dawkins' book on atheism. He didn't read it, but he wanted to get to me. And but it starts a lot of great conversations because I said, whatever you do, find truth.
Yes.
Find truth and get him on that journey.
One of your last chapters is about don't be a victim. And I was just thinking, you know, we've had Jonathan Haidt on this program, the coddling of the American mind and all this kind of stuff. And there is kind of a victim mentality on the college campus. It needs safe spaces. We've had Dennis Prager sit in that chair there and talk about their film and all sorts of others. And part of that is the feminist toxicity also shows up in, well, I'm a victim.
Right.
And you don't want your daughter to be a victim.
Right. And it's really rooted in I deserve. You know, I deserve to be able to do this. I deserve for you not to be mean to me. I deserve for you not to speak in such a way. But the problem is when we do that, we help girls stay focused on themselves, stay focused on their wishes, rather than saying, look, you can handle any situation. And so don't be a victim. You know, people are going to hurt your feelings and people are going to be mean to you. And what I say to you in any tough situations, what can you do? Don't wait for other people to not do this and not do this because it's not going to work. But to really strengthen young girls and say, this is how you say no. This is how you set boundaries. This is how you be a disciplined person. Rather than expecting others around you to do things. That is so unbiblical. really. And so really what I'm doing is teaching parents how to really give their daughters strength, not weakness.
Just before we go, let's mention that we have meekerparenting.com, and you don't even have to know how to spell it because we have the link there, but you have a 5-day boot camp. You have 5 days to stress-free parenting. You have a blog. You have all the books and resources. So when people land there, what will they find? Because there's just all sorts of great material on that website. So give us a little bit of an idea what we will find when we go to the podcast and the website and everything.
Sure. Well, I have a podcast called Parenting Great Kids, and I interview a lot of different people, but the whole point is to bring real greatness out in your kid. I'm also creating a community where parents of kids of all ages can come in, and I'll answer questions, as many as I can, and parents can dialogue. Well, this is what I did when my son was 5, and really kind of help each other, because we need to come together and create a large tribe, because the world is tough. Mm-hmm. But I believe if we get enough parents to say, I'm not going to give my kids a cell phone, we will have a positive peer effect, because parents don't really want to do it. They just don't want to be the first person not to do it. Mm-hmm. And so if we show that there are some parents who are lying with each other, then we can really create a positive influence. So that's really what I'm trying to do with my Meeker parenting community.
And I think it's a good idea, because I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there was this conspiracy of the parents against the kids.
Absolutely.
And now it seems like it's a conspiracy of the kids against the parents. They're playing one parent off the other. They got a cell phone. They got to go to that R-rated film. And I go, as if I care. We're going to have biblical principles here, and we're going to do the right thing. And we'll, if nothing else, try to talk them out of these ideas. So what we need is a community of parents. And so that's just a great opportunity. Again, there are great resources. Of course, Dave Ramsey had been on his program many times. I ran into somebody today that said the reason I even knew this book was coming out because I heard about it, Dave Ramsey. Aww. But I think a lot of our people heard about it today because they heard about it on Point of View. So one last time, Raising a Strong Daughter in a Toxic Culture, 11 Steps to Keep Her Happy, Healthy, and Safe. About 200 pages, published by our friends at Regnery. And it is just a delight to have you in studio.
Oh, it's so nice to be with you, Kerby.
We have had a good relationship with her over the years. It has been much too long since we've had her in. So next time, maybe it'll be by phone. And for those of you up in Michigan, I'm going to go try to visit you and her. So we'll see what happens there. Maybe I can be on her podcast. But if nothing else, we have all sorts of information on the website today. And so you can click on the button there and learn more about Meg Meeker. You can click on the button that shows the book. I think you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have it both in hardcover and Kindle so that you can get it there. And if you find yourself saying, I'd really like to listen to that again, that was a good interview, go to the website and click on that button that says listen. You can download a podcast. Maybe you know somebody struggling right now with their daughter. Send it to them. Or if you'd like to watch it, since she's been in studio, click on the watch button, and you could watch it right now. Of course, within about an hour or two, it'll be up on Facebook, and that's where we'll have it, as well as up on YouTube. We need to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View,
and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and we're so grateful that you could join us today. And this first hour is going to be kind of an open line. I've got lots to cover, but I also want to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212, because if nothing else, I think common sense is starting to break out when it comes to this issue of the coronavirus. And that is that you're now starting to see all sorts of individuals basically saying what we've been saying on this program for months, and that is young children going to school are not threatened by the coronavirus. They are not super spreaders, and we are doing a great deal of damage by keeping them out of the schools. And that relates very much to the article I posted yesterday by Deborah Saunders about how remote learning in public schools is widening the achievement gap. So a good example of now maybe some people looking at this and changing their minds. Dr. Anthony Fauci was on the Talking Head show saying that even the governor of New York reluctantly sort of admitted maybe that is the case, because we are doing great damage by keeping young children out of school for all sorts of reasons that we've documented and probably will today. I might, while we're talking about the coronavirus, also say that a bipartisan and bicameral group have unveiled a coronavirus proposal, because as you may know, there has been no movement at all in providing relief to a number of individuals who are still out of their jobs, protection for those who might be evicted, and a number of others. So we will get to that as time goes on. And while we're talking about the virus, before we get into some other issues, I might mention that we now have some pretty good evidence that there is at least one of the vaccines that should concern those of you that are pro-life. And that is something that has been put forward, so we will spend some time talking about that. By the way, one of the things I'd love to ask of you is, are you, if indeed the vaccine is available to you, going to take the vaccine? There are a couple of questions. Number one, certainly would you take the vaccine? Number two, if you recognize that one of those vaccines was produced through the use of fetal tissue from abortion, would you still use that vaccine? Two out of the three are certainly not ethically questionable. One is, so we'll talk about that in just a minute. And it kind of brings me to a point I'd like to make early on, and that is, if you are not familiar, today, as we've mentioned before, is Giving Tuesday. Now, I recognize you probably have been inundated with a couple of emails and others in that regard, and so I just want to be sensitive to that. Earlier today, I was talking to someone, and I just happened to mention that I have about 700 emails I have to go through. I just looked now. I think I'm up to 834 emails that I haven't had a chance to look at. She was just shocked and said, I can't believe you have that many emails. I said, well, I get hundreds every day, but I would venture to say that maybe a third of those all have to do with Giving Tuesday. So I recognize that you probably, if you support as many organizations as my wife and I do, have had certainly a number of people reminding you that today is Giving Tuesday. But I hope you'll consider that, because if nothing else, I want you to make sure that you support your church. I want to make sure you support, if this is a non-commercial station you're listening on, to support them. But also just think about all the things you've been learning here at Point of View.
Yesterday, for example, we talked about creation and evolution. I don't think you're going to be hearing that on the mainstream media. We talked about the runoff in Georgia and gave you some information that Alveda King brought to the table. We talked about the Supreme Court, as a matter of fact, and the decision on religious liberty, which I will get to later this hour. And again, not only would you not hear about it, but you hear, if nothing else, very critical comments about it. I have in front of me here USA Today. This is the piece by Lawrence Tribe and Michael Dorff, who are very critical of the fact that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of religious liberty. Now, there are a couple arguments that they make. One is that, indeed, that was not necessary because New York had changed its rules, but that's, I think, not a real great argument because, yes, we've seen this many times before. People change the rules just before it goes to the court and they know they're going to lose, but you need to have a ruling so it doesn't happen again. So I understand that in some respects they disagree with this idea of religious liberty, didn't think the Supreme Court needed to step in, but only here on Point of View probably are you hearing about how this was a victory for religious liberty. Today, for example, you're going to hear about some of the vaccines, at least one of the vaccines that really raises some very important questions about at least how we would use that vaccine, whether or not you would want to use that one because it used fetal tissue. Going to talk about how China now, even CNN is admitting that China did mislead us on the coronavirus. And then, of course, we also have posted an article, which I do from time to time, that I don't agree with, but I want you to hear it. And it's the individuals with Dominion voting systems trying to defend themselves, which we'll get to later, but it's a good illustration that somebody is not telling the truth. Because if you've been watching any of these testimonies, one in Pennsylvania, one in Arizona, you can think, for example, of Colonel Phil Waldron. I watched that the other day, in which he said the Dominion Suite user manual is about 1.5 inches thick. My chief went through it and found instances in which operators connect the Ethernet cords to the router and the systems are connected to the internet. Our teams even looked at the spirographs of the Dominion network for Election Day and showed an increased web traffic. And the bottom line is they're connected to the internet. He went on to also talk about some of the connection of Dominion with other groups. And this, of course, is being denied right now by the head of Dominion. You also in Arizona had witnesses saying that they noticed that the signatures on the ballots that they were receiving there in Arizona didn't even resemble in any way the ones that were there. Some were completely illegible, and they were simply told to ignore that. Of course, you have the stories that also came out of Arizona where they said, we thought we were done counting ballots, and then more truckloads of ballots were coming in. Like, how do you know how many ballots are still out there? And so these kinds of testimonies have taken place certainly in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and the rest. And later today in Arlington, Virginia, the Amistad Project will be holding a press conference, and they're an effort to look at the election. A number of their claims are pretty interesting. They have, on this press conference taking place today, 3 whistleblowers will provide personal eyewitness accounts of demonstrating significant potential voter fraud. And the one that I think is probably going to get the most attention, that is, if the press was even slightly curious about this, comes from a Pennsylvania postal truck driver who actually has testified that he has shipped, and he's guessing from anywhere from 144,000 to 288,000 completed ballots across 3 state lines in October to be filled out in advance for Joe Biden in case Donald Trump outperforms expectations. And somewhere along the line, you have to say, somebody's not telling the truth. And so we'll keep following that. And so if you find yourself saying, I just hear all sorts of things on Point of View I hear nowhere else, I hope that you might consider going to the website, which is pointofview.net. We have a banner there that says Giving Tuesday. And today we're just asking you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. And if you find yourself saying, you know, I'm learning a lot of things on Point of View, and I'm hearing a perspective I hear nowhere else, and I've come to you because I believe you probably are a trusted source of information, then I hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry. And when we come back, we're going to get into some of these issues. There are a lot of things happening, some of which is covered by the mainstream press. Most of it is completely ignored, and you may be hearing it only today here on Point of View. That's what we do, trying to bring you some information, some perspective that maybe you look for and hope for, but are troubling in trying to find it. Hopefully you find it here. We'll take a break and come back with some of those news stories right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The slogan, defund the police, has done great damage. Byron York took the time to talk about the political implications of this slogan and also document the real-world cost of the phrase. For months, the phrase defund the police was repeated at every protest and riot. As we got closer to the general election, some Democratic candidates started getting nervous, fearing that the slogan would hurt them politically. That is why they tried to redefine the term by telling us that defund the police merely meant that some funds for the police would be redirected to programs for mental health treatment and affordable housing. The problem for these politicians is that progressives in their party wouldn't let them redefine the term. For example, an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times had the headline, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police." As I mentioned in previous commentaries, many Democrats in Congress have been criticizing other progressives, saying that the slogan nearly cost them their reelection. Many who lost in November no doubt also believe they lost because of the phrase, defund the police. But the political cost is small compared to the loss of life. One story from Minneapolis found that homicides are up 50%. More than 500 people have been shot, the highest number in more than a decade, and twice as many as in 2019, and there have been more than 4,600 violent crimes. You might remember on June 26th, the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to abolish the city's police department. More than 100 police officers retired, and now the city council has had to provide $500,000 in emergency funding to hire temporary officers to get the city through the end of the year. These are just some of the horrible cost of the defund the police slogan. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Okay, back once again. Let's, if we can, spend some time talking about whether or not there's going to be any more funding for the whole issue of the coronavirus and the impact that the lockdowns and the pandemic have made. And certainly, if you have been paying attention, there has been no movement at all in Congress. And next week, it's quite possible that members of Congress will head home. Great job if you can get it. You know, again, I sometimes kid Louis Gohmert or Van Taylor or some of the other members of Congress that are in here. And I know that they're working when they're at home, and it's not like that. But there is a sense in which Congress has done almost nothing. And there has been an incredible stalemate between the proposal that was put forward by the administration, that would be the Trump administration, and in particular Steve Mnuchin, and then the proposals being put forward primarily by Nancy Pelosi, but also by Chuck Schumer. And they're so far apart that nothing has happened. So to the credit of some of those individuals who would like to get something done to help people that could be evicted from their home, could be trying to figure out where their next meal comes from, and need some kind of help, as well as the tremendous strain that has been on our hospitals and other things, we have a group of bipartisan, that means they're both Democrat and Republican, bicameral, both senators and representatives, although most of the names I'm going to mention are U.S. senators. For the Democrats, it's people like Joe Manchin, Mark Warner, Jeanne Shaheen. For the Republicans, it's people like Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. And they've come forward with a solution, which I think is a good solution. It is a compromise solution. It will make both sides a little bit upset, but this is the kind of thing, for those of you that are younger listening to this program, that used to happen in the 1970s and 1980s. And thus, as the country got more polarized and Congress got more polarized, nobody talks to anybody else. There's a few exceptions. Van Taylor, I just mentioned a minute ago, is a good example of that, but not many. So they are coming up with something that is less than $1 trillion. It's the number is actually $908 billion for coronavirus relief. Joe Manchin, who is a Democrat from West Virginia, said it would be inexcusable, he says, for Congress to leave town for the year without providing some coronavirus relief, with a slew of assistance programs which are set to expire within weeks. So I think he is right on target in that regard. The bill would actually provide about $160 billion for states and cities, which is a real priority for especially some of the Democrats in Congress. About $180 billion for unemployment insurance, because after all, some of these people have been unemployed. And by the way, even though today is Giving Tuesday, if you are unemployed, if you certainly are straining financially, don't even think about supporting this ministry. We would certainly hope that some of you, where God has blessed you and you have been able to work, or maybe God has placed some resources in your hands, I hope you might consider joining us. But if you're one of those unemployed, if nothing else, send us a note so we can pray for you, because I recognize that there are still a lot of people that are unemployed. About $288 billion for small business assistance through what we've talked about on this program before. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program, which has been helpful for small businesses. It's also been helpful for a number of churches and Christian organizations in that regard. The unemployment benefits would break down to about $300 a week for 18 weeks, which would be retroactive to today, December 1st. That shows you how we already are having difficulty. That's about half of the $600 per week, which existed under the CARES Act. But again, we're spending more and more money, and it's got to come from somewhere. And I'm afraid we're putting all this debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren. So at least something to help individuals who find themselves unemployed. This also includes billions of dollars in assistance for transportation-related industries, and that would be your airlines. Again, if you have traveled in Thanksgiving, I hope you've been safe and you have not come down with the coronavirus, but that's an issue. Also, of this, about $16 billion for vaccine development and distribution, and money for things like schools, child care, even for the Postal Service, just a lot of things there. And so, in some respects, the price tag for this proposal is about almost twice what was being pushed for by Mitch McConnell, who's a Republican from Kentucky and the Senate Majority Leader, because that was about $500 billion they were proposing. But it's about half, actually less than half, of the $2.2 trillion being put forward by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leader, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. So if nothing else, it's, again, trying to find a compromise. Something is better than nothing. And certainly this is an attempt to try to bring this about. And so, again, let's quote from a Democrat, quote from a Republican. Democrat Senator Mark Warner, he's a Democrat from Virginia, said, "It's not going to make everyone happy, but there's an enormous amount of work done," adding that it would be, he thinks, stupidity on steroids to leave for the year without passing more assistance. Let me quote from a Republican, just to be fair here, and that is Susan Collins, who won re-election. She's a Republican from Maine, and she added that it was absolutely essential that we pass emergency relief. So that's where we are. And so if you're one of those individuals that's saying, I'm having trouble even paying the rent, paying for the mortgage. I wonder if I'm going to get evicted. I don't know where my next dollars are going to come. I'm going to the food bank and they're almost out of food. Or, I'm working for the airlines and they've laid me off and we're wondering if the airlines are even going to survive. I mean, just all sorts of very vague questions. This is at least an attempt to try to provide that answer. And maybe you'll hear about that today on the news, but let me take a story that I got a feeling you won't hear. And that is, are any of these vaccines that are now in the third stage trial, and some are believing that even next week you could possibly be vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, and soon after that with the Moderna vaccine. What about that? Are there any ethical questions about that? Maybe you'll hear this on the mainstream media, but if nothing else, we try to cover some stories that maybe aren't covered in a lot of places. And it turns out that our good friends at Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is actually one of the organizations, and it's the Research and Educational Institute tied into the pro-life Susan B. Anthony list. And we've had, of course, the head of Susan B. Anthony list on the program with us. And they have concluded this, that the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the AstraZeneca results are actually all at least 90% effective. But then their line was, but from a pro-life perspective, the three vaccines are not equal. The pro-life Charlotte Lozier Institute lists the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccines as ethically uncontroversial. In other words, they are really raising no moral questions because of the way they were produced. By contrast, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was developed at Oxford, is, they say, unethical because it used a fetal cell line derived from an abortion. And they use that in the development and in the, first of all, in the design, the development, and production of the vaccine. And so they have raised serious moral questions from a pro-life point of view about the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. Lest you think that's just one opinion, it turns out also that representatives of the National Catholic Bioethics Center reached a similar conclusion, once again saying that they felt that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are ethically sound, but raising serious questions about some of the others. They said neither the Pfizer nor the Moderna vaccine involved the use of cell lines that originated in fetal tissue taken from the body of an aborted baby at any level of design, development, and production. However, the one from AstraZeneca did. Now, for those of you that are thinking about taking the vaccine, AstraZeneca was developed in England, in the UK, at Oxford. It's probably most likely that that vaccine will be tended to be used more in the UK and maybe in places in Europe. So it's less likely that you, if you go to a doctor's office or a hospital and you get the vaccine, that you would receive either probably the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. And so that is, I think, helpful. But for those of us that have real serious questions, and I think if you're pro-life, you probably should, about the use of various developed vaccines or other products from abortion-derived cell lines, I wanted you to know about that. And when I come back, I'll give you a few more comments. But most importantly, I want to hear your comments. What's your thoughts? 1-800-351-1212. Would you take a vaccine? What about the pro-life concerns about AstraZeneca? Love to get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Just want to know if you might want to take the vaccine, but more importantly, one of the questions that at least pro-life groups have been raising is, are they all equal in terms of moral stance? And the answer to that is no. It turns out that the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna National Institute of Health vaccines, the ones most likely you would probably get here in the United States, certainly do not raise any ethical questions. They're both considered to be ethically sound by both the group that is associated with the Susan B. Anthony list, Charlotte Lozier Institute, as well as the National Catholic Bioethics Center, to mention just a few groups that have looked at that. By contrast, the one which is AstraZeneca, developed at the University of Oxford, which is also about 90% effective, does raise some questions. And again, AstraZeneca called AZD1222, in case you happen to see that on a bottle or want to know about it, used what's called the HEK293 fetal cell line derived from an abortion during all 4 stages. It was used during the design stage, the development stage, the production stage, and the testing stage. And so that's why various groups that are pro-life have referred to it as unethical. And so it contains a trace of the DNA from the aborted fetus. And that one even goes to an article you can find in PolitiFact. So you will perhaps find this, but it is amazing to me how some of this probably is not going to be covered, and that's why I thought we might cover it here today. One more reason why, as we've mentioned, that today is what's called Giving Tuesday, and if you have been thinking about supporting this ministry or thinking about supporting various ministries or even your own church, I would encourage you to do that. And we've made it very easy for you to do so. And that is the whole issue of going to the website, pointofview.net, and spend some time talking about that. One of the callers off air asked when we were going to talk about nanotechnology. We probably will. As a matter of fact, I'm aware of some books and resources that are coming out in that regard. So that's a good program note, and I appreciate that as well. Let's move on, though. We just have too many other things to talk about. And one of the articles I've posted today is One Judge Swing on the Supreme Court. It's written by Andrew McCarthy. He's been on the program with us before, and is an individual that we've quoted from time to time on everything from, interestingly enough, the issue of the war on terror, because he was front and center for those who prosecuted those who tried to blow up the World Trade Center the first time and was successful, to now as an individual really commenting on various legal issues. And in this article we've posted on our website, he said, what a difference a one-judge swing in the Supreme Court makes. He says last week, of course, the High Court, in a 5-4 ruling, granted 2 religious organizations an injunction relieving them from what he called the suffocating restrictions that New York Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo had imposed on the community worship. If you're not familiar, it had to do with the Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn, as well as a particular Jewish community there that brought the suit. And he points out that we've learned a lot more now when they've put these restrictions on the churches, because if nothing else, those restrictions have been placed on those churches because they are treated differently than everyone else. And again, I might just mention that we are talking about this as a success. You can go to USA Today and see Lawrence Tribe saying, no, that is a disaster. We don't need that. One, because they were ruling on a situation that had changed. But number two, Lawrence Tribe and Michael Dorff seem to make the case that actually you're more dangerous in a church than you are anywhere else. And the argument is that when people are standing or singing, that's more dangerous than we're in a liquor store, places like that. Okay, I have trouble with that argument, but okay, that's their argument. And you might sometimes say, why do I give the other side? Like for today, we've posted this piece which is attempting to defend the voting systems by Dominion. Well, because I want you, first of all, to hear both sides. Because if you're involved in a conversation with somebody, they're going to bring up something and you're going to go, I haven't heard that. And if you say, I'm really wondering whether a number of votes were switched on software because this company was tied into Venezuela and has been used in other countries, and somebody says, no, they were just on even Wall Street Journal defending themselves and say none of that happened. And okay, you need to know that that was said and then even know how to respond to it. So sometimes I get criticized because I present the other side, but I think you'll be a much more effective advocate when I do. Anyway, let's go back to this Supreme Court case, because they pointed out that for 5 months, we really didn't know as much. But now 5 months later, fully 8 months into the coronavirus pandemic, we have a very different set of reactions to some of the restrictions that had been imposed in New York, California, and Illinois. And so as a result, this ruling, interestingly enough, was one which was 5-4. And you might say, well, I thought we had, quote, 6 conservatives. Well, it's whether you consider the Chief Justice John Roberts a conservative, because he actually voted with the 3 liberals. But even though he did, he also conceded that the limitations by the governor, that would be Andrew Cuomo, do seem unduly restrictive, and so went through some of that. I thought it might be worth, though, just for another minute or two before we take another break, to talk about how this deciding ruling came down. Now, the bottom line is this is not the same where you have oral arguments before the Supreme Court, and this was, in some respects, another criticism that was brought because they issued an injunction because they simply wanted this unequal treatment to stop. And so in some respects, you don't have a final decision. In some respects, it postponed a decision, but at least put the restrictions that were established by the state of New York on pause. So in the midst of that, let's give you some background. Justice Neil Gorsuch actually said, so at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it's always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your digital points and meridians. In other words, traveling all around. Who knew that public health could so perfectly align with secular convenience? And so they argued that this difference in treatment, what's called the desperate treatment, discriminates against religion. Now, it was interesting because in this particular article that appeared by the editors of the Wall Street Journal, they went on to make a very serious case about the fact that while they were looking at some of these very important issues, that the vote by Justice Amy Coney Barrett was decisive. They went on to say that the court ruled against previous religious appeals in the pandemic, and Justice Gorsuch unloaded on the Chief Justice opinion in May in the California case. And we'll probably talk about this on Friday if Kelly Shackelford is with us, because it's called South Bay United Pentecostal Church versus Newsom. And back then, they ruled the other way because Amy Coney Barrett was not there. And the Chief Justice, that would be John Roberts, cited a precedent from a century ago that argued that we should just defer to the authority and expertise of local officials in an emergency. And so I thought Justice Gorsuch's response was very good. Even if the Constitution has taken a holiday during the pandemic, it cannot become a sabbatical. Rather than applying a non-binding and expired concurrence from South Bay, courts must resume applying the free exercise clause. Today, a majority of the court makes this plain. And so, as we've pointed out before, and Kelly Shackelford always does such a good job of saying that this is one of those cases where somehow churches are so much more dangerous because you can go to a wine shop, you can go to a bike shop, you can go to a big body, one of those big or various kinds of places for outreach, or you can, for example, even travel around. You can even go to all sorts of various facilities. All of that is just fine. But somehow what happens inside the church or inside a synagogue is enough to close it down. And to give you a feel for that, I mentioned this yesterday, but when you look at some of the numbers, it really is amazing because there were these different colors. You know, there was red and purple and all the rest. So if you were in one of those, it looks like something out of Twister. Remember Twister? We had the colors and everything. If you were in that particular area, you could have all of 10 people in that religious worship service. If you were in a different color, you could have 25. And, of course, you can see the impact that this was having because none of those color-coded areas were affecting commercial establishments. So, if nothing else, again, just wanted to cover an issue that is becoming slightly controversial, and that is the whole issue of religious liberty. And so we are going to continue covering those issues and talking about this as a very significant success. And as somebody said the other day, you may or may not like President Trump, but you've got to like the fact that there are 3 justices on the Supreme Court that actually believe in religious liberty. And that's a good thing for you and your church and your Christian organization. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just indicate that next hour we're going to talk about shrinking the integrity gap. Get away from some of the issues in the news here, and Jeff and Terra Mattson will be with us. And if you've seen fallen leaders, why do they fall? Of course, that is always a very important question, one we've addressed here before on Point of View. And they have a very good book so that whether you are dealing with a church and maybe church leaders or a pastor, whether you're thinking about politicians or a number of others, or whether you're a leader. And I love what they say in the book. If you have people that are following you, you're a leader. And so in some respects, we can learn these lessons, but also apply them to some of the scandals and the falls that we've seen before. So again, that will be our conversation next hour. But let me just, before we take a break, mention a couple of things. First of all, my commentary today is called Defund the Police. And the reason I bring it up is that there are a number of individuals that have certainly said that this was very significant, perhaps in the loss of a number of seats held by Democrats in the House of Representatives because of the phrase defund the police. And I think it illustrates a point, because we have individuals that were telling us even back then that, well, the phrase defund the police really doesn't mean defund the police. And so I point out, actually, that didn't help when you had one individual in an op-ed in the New York Times who had the headline, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police." And so I talk about how that not only had a very devastating impact on, of course, some of these individuals running for re-election that had a D next to their name, but then I point out that the political cost is small compared to the loss of life, because, as we've mentioned on this program before, one of the studies that came from Minneapolis, remember all the controversy there, found that homicides are up 50%. More than 500 people have been shot. That's the highest number in more than a decade, twice as many as the people in 2019. And there have been 4,600 violent crimes. Well, in the midst of that, when you hear defund the police and you're working in law enforcement, what do? You say, well, if I'm old enough, I'm going to take retirement or early retirement. If I'm not, I'm going to go try someplace else, because it sounds to me like, after looking at that vote on June 26th, the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to abolish the police department. And I can see where that's going. And so as a result, they have already, in the Minneapolis Police Department, lost more than 100 officers who have retired or have already left, and more planning to leave. So they had to actually go in front of the city council and have them provide $500,000, $500,000, simply in emergency funding to try to hire some temporary officers to get the city through the end of the year. So again, just one more example of the cost of a phrase like defund the police. And it kind of brings me back to one of the reasons why we ask you to consider what you might do to support this ministry, because next week I have all sorts of other articles coming out that remind us once again that we live in a world where you probably can't trust the mainstream media. My article and commentary coming out on Monday has the title Google Bias and the Election. And that comes from a research study that was done by Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a Harvard-trained Democrat. Matter of fact, he did this study 4 years ago and concluded how many votes were actually switched to Hillary Clinton. But this time has come to the conclusion that at least 6 million votes were shifted to the Democrat Joe Biden. And that is the minimum number, because they are still crunching through the data. And so to calculate the maximum number of votes, it's going to take some more data. And you might say, well, he's just got to be a Trump supporter. No, he's a Democrat. He actually said he wanted Joe Biden to win, but he also wants this election to be fair. And so I salute him for looking at the research and pointing out that Google bias was enough to probably switch a lot of the votes. But then there's another issue. That's the Tuesday article that is coming up, and that is what I call media bias and the election, because we've talked about this on the air. The Media Research Center actually did a polling with a group called the Polling Company to survey about 1,750 Biden voters in 7 swing states. And many of you are listening in one of those swing states. That would be Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And what they did, and I think it was really well done, is to test the voters' knowledge of 8 news stories that weren't well covered, or in some cases weren't covered at all by the liberal news media. And so out of those 1,750 Biden voters, they found that 1 in 6 of them, that'd be 17%, said that they would have abandoned the Democratic candidate if they had known the facts in one or more of these studies or stories. Now, to point it out, 3 of the stories that they talked about were those that reflected poorly on Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Those would be stories about, most of them, a third of them did not even know about this sex assault allegation against Joe Biden. Almost half didn't know about the scandals involving Hunter Biden. I suspect that's the case. And about a quarter of them did not know that Senator Kamala Harris had the most left-wing record of any senator. Well, then you had, in addition to those, you had a couple of other stories as well, and those have to do with the success stories of the Trump administration. Without going into all the details, they found that anywhere from 4 in 10 to 5 in 10, so anywhere from about 40% plus to 50%, did not know about such issues as the economic growth. As a matter of fact, the snapback, as we called it here, the creation of 11 million jobs during the Trump administration, did not know about the Middle East peace deals, did not know that we had achieved energy independence, did not know the successes of Operation Warp Speed. Again, you have to understand how important it is to listen to programs like Point of View or to get more information, because these people said, at least 70% of them said they would have changed their vote if they'd been aware of those issues. And if you run the numbers, it's real simple. Matter of fact, they do this in a piece that I have linked so that you can look at it, and you will see that it will actually have switched all of those swing states. Now, North Carolina came out for Donald Trump, but the others actually would swing to Donald Trump, and that would have given him 311 electoral votes. And if nothing else, just illustrates again that whether it's social media, Google searches, or the mainstream media, I hope that you appreciate the fact that we try to give you a lot of information you probably will hear nowhere else. So as we take a break, let's, if we can, talk about what you can do. And Tuesday is Giving Tuesday. So we've given you an opportunity, if you want to go to the website, which is pointofview.net. We have a place there for you to consider what you might want to do to make a special gift today. And so I would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. If you say, well, I don't have access to a computer right now, or I'd like to talk to someone, of course, we have the pledge line number, which you can certainly call. That is 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. But the simplest way is simply go to the website. And I know that a good number of you actually receive emails from me, so no doubt you have received one or more emails about Giving Tuesday. And I recognize that you probably have received a few other emails from some other ministries and organizations as well. So let me encourage you to give to your church. If this is a radio station that certainly raises funds, a non-commercial station, I hope you might give to this station, but hope you might consider us as well, because we certainly are trying to educate you about a lot of these issues. And more than ever, we're recognizing we just can't trust the media out there. It's just not reporting the news and the stories in an accurate and fair way. So that's why I hope you come to Point of View. Let's take a break. We're going to talk about integrity right after these messages.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about integrity. It is a conversation we've had before, especially when we talk about integrity as it relates to various leaders. You might remember an interview we did a while back with Scott McKnight about some of the fallen Christian leaders. But as this book points out, if you have people following you, you are a leader. So you may not necessarily be the pastor of a church. You may not be a Sunday school leader. You may not be a leader in business, but there are probably all sorts of individuals who look to you for leadership. And there have been so many books written about leadership. This one brings a very important aspect of thinking about how to shrink the integrity gap. It is published by our friends at David C. Cook. It came out last month, actually 1st of October, so I guess we should technically say 2 months ago now. And as a result, it is written by individuals that have been really identifying, if you will, some of those symptoms of integrity gaps, which is a very significant part of the book. It is written by Jeff Mattson and Terra Mattson, and they advocate for healthy leadership. They're founders of Living Wholehearted, and you can find information about that on our website. We have a link to livingwholehearted.com. There is a podcast. There's all sorts of great information, and you may want to go there to find out a little bit more. And they join me now by phone from Oregon. So, Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's great to be with you.
Okay, we seemingly are having a problem with one of the phones. Let me go to Tara. Tara, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Tara, at the moment, I think I'm going to talk to you because for some reason we have problems with Jeff's line. We'll give that a try in just a minute. But I think you probably can cover it just as easily as I can, because this book is one that I think we really need to understand. There's a section here on the foundations of leading and the stories of leading, but then really 10 different chapters on the symptoms of integrity gaps. But share with us, if you might, for just a minute, how you came to pull this book together, because as I might mention, you have counseling background, so I'm sure you've run into some of this in terms of your counseling.
Absolutely. We have been running a private practice and a consulting organization working with leaders for the last 15 years, Living Wholehearted. And day in, day out, we have seen a wide variety of concerns of the disconnect between who we present ourselves to be out in the world versus what's really going on in our inner life. And that's what we call that integrity gap.
And again, we've sometimes have seen leaders that preach one thing and live something else. And of course, the obvious ones are the ones that we sometimes have talked about on this program, individuals that are heads of mega churches and others, or key business leaders, or even politicians. But Tara, if anything, I'm picking up on the fact that you really help us understand that this isn't just for those few people in this rarefied atmosphere of leadership where they're leading huge congregations or Fortune 500 companies. It applies to those of us that find ourselves in one kind of leadership position or another.
Yeah, and absolutely. We say if you are a parent, you are leading the greatest organization on the planet, which is a lot of what we see, whether it's our marriages or working with the concerns of our kids that see us up close and personal, right? The real who we are day in, day out in our homes. But whether if we're even doing anything on social media these days, we are influencing people all over the place. So the way that we live and who we present ourselves to be, we're really wanting to be able to take a good look. But honestly, we are really speaking to those who have a greater wake of influence, because those are the ones that end up reaching far greater wakes of influence when they're not living with integrity. And we see that fall day in and day out in the news.
Jeff, and we have you back, I understand now. And let's, if we can, maybe talk about how you founded Living Wholeheartedly, because that and also the Courageous Girls Movement are some organizations I wanted our listeners to know about, and we have some links to it on our website. But to give us some of the background.
Yeah, thanks, Kerby, and it's good to be back. Living Wholehearted, we founded that organization, our organization, in 2011, really as a culmination of both Terra's and my passion for leaders and for living with integrity. And, it's one thing for us to be talking about that. Of course, it's another thing to be living it day in and day out. We look back to our own stories of growing up and experiencing being under leaders that did live and lead with integrity, and how much that impacted us in a positive sense, and what we could see it doing in the wakes of those leaders. We also experienced individually and at different seasons, and some seasons together when we did meet, what it was like to be under leaders who lacked integrity and had large integrity gaps, and just the negative impact and really the harm and hurt that experienced there. God was using those experiences in our own stories and our own leadership journeys to help shape and form this vision and heartbeat about leaders. And in 2011, when we formed our organization, we began really integrating two different disciplines that came into focus for us, both the professional counseling discipline, and Terra is our clinical director and leads a wonderful team of clinicians and therapists that are working with all kinds of leaders, whether executives of their corporations or single moms. I mean, again, as you indicated in the intro, if you have a following of any sort, you are a leader. How you live and lead matters. And in my discipline of the coaching and leadership coaching, organizational development field, that's kind of a backdoor into many leaders' hearts and lives. A lot of leaders, especially as they climb the ladder, if you will, from a capacity and from an influence standpoint, don't really want to go through a door of a counseling office, unless maybe they have to.
Yes.
And we created that back door where they hire me or our team to come in and to work with them and the people issues that concern them, keep them up at night, right, in their organizations and businesses. And it really is the people issues that do keep us as leaders up. We're trying to navigate, trying to figure out how, and try to earn trust, rapport, and then can begin to influence, not just in the business and organization, but of course, with that trust comes open doors to what's going on under the hood. And that's a bit of background about Living Wholehearted and Courageous Girls. I'll let Terra talk a little bit about that.
Let me just take a break. So we're coming to a break. Let's do that right after the break, because I wanted to get into that. And also, when we come back from the break, let's, if we can, also talk about some of the trends, because you've said that after 20 years of helping leaders in churches and parachurch organizations, businesses, organizations, and others, you're seeing a real trend, and that is that each generation of leaders, in one way or another, inherits kind of a toxic baggage of previous generations and then passes it on, especially if that does not go unaddressed. So I certainly want to come back to that. And I do want all those of you that are listening to take the time to visit their website, livingwholeheartedly.com. You also might want to know a little bit more about the Courageous Girls, and that is a movement as well. We'll talk about after the break. And then we'll get into those 10 toxic areas, symptoms of integrity gaps. It is a book that has about 280 plus pages. It's published by David C. Cook. It came out last month. You perhaps can find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link to their website. You can get it there and also find out more about them as well. There's a great video that we'll talk about that we encourage you not only to watch, but even maybe think about posting on your Facebook page. So we've got a lot to cover. We will do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The slogan, defund the police, has done great damage. Byron York took the time to talk about the political implications of this slogan and also document the real-world cost of the phrase. For months, the phrase defund the police was repeated at every protest and riot. As we got closer to the general election, some Democratic candidates started getting nervous, fearing that the slogan would hurt them politically. That is why they tried to redefine the term by telling us that defund the police merely meant that some funds for the police would be redirected to programs for mental health treatment and affordable housing. The problem for these politicians is that progressives in their party wouldn't let them redefine the term. For example, an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times had the headline, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police." As I mentioned in previous commentaries, many Democrats in Congress have been criticizing other progressives, saying that the slogan nearly cost them their reelection. Many who lost in November no doubt also believe they lost because of the phrase, defund the police. But the political cost is small compared to the loss of life. One story from Minneapolis found that homicides are up 50%. More than 500 people have been shot, the highest number in more than a decade, and twice as many as in 2019, and there have been more than 4,600 violent crimes. You might remember on June 26th, the Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to abolish the city's police department. More than 100 police officers retired, and now the city council has had to provide $500,000 in emergency funding to hire temporary officers to get the city through the end of the year. These are just some of the horrible cost of the defund the police slogan. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Jeff and Terra Mattson as we talk about their book, Shrinking the Integrity Gap. They join us from Tualatin, Oregon, and if you would like to know a little bit more about their website, it is livingwholeheartedly.com. But Terra, just for a minute, let's, if we can, also remind people that in addition to that, we've probably spent a little bit of time in the past talking about the movement Courageous Girls, but if you can educate our listeners that maybe are not familiar with that movement.
Absolutely. It's a movement to help moms really walk with their daughters at every stage of their growing years. You know, we're in an age with so many confusing messages, and our girls are bombarded at every turn. So we've created a vehicle where moms can gather together with 6 to 8 other moms and daughters and walk with their daughters from second grade all the way through high school. And we've created a biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom that they can trust with curriculum and all kinds of resources to really help these moms. And what's so powerful is these daughters are practicing day in, day out of how to be a woman who knows she is loved by God and how to love others well. And we really face the issues, the hard issues that you face. We're facing them in the home between moms and daughters and trying to talk about all the things that girls need to know before they're launched into the world.
So again, great resource for you to know about as well. We have links on this to the website. And so, Jeff, let's, if we can, maybe start by talking about integrity. That is a word that is similar to like integers. I remember that from math, or integrated circuits, all of them coming together. But I've oftentimes said that integrity is who you are when nobody's looking. But how would you define integrity, since we're going to be dealing with that for the rest of the broadcast?
Yeah, integrity really to us is where all of who you are, your heart, your mind, your soul, your relationships are all moving in a singular and hopefully a God-orientated direction, right? And it's encompassing of a whole person, and so that's how we define it.
And so, again, it's just a good kind of working piece. But early on, you talk about this idea of trauma and triggers and things of that nature. I can't think of anybody that I've ever heard speak on leadership that goes back to talk about some of the trauma in an individual's life, but it's a good example of one of those kind of toxic baggages that you carry into a marriage relationship, you carry into a business, carry into a church. And if you don't really address the past, then in some respects it carries on into your future, doesn't it?
That's so true, Kerby. And oh, go ahead, Tara.
I was going to say that the connection that we're making between trauma and leadership is really a rare one. But what we see with all trauma survivors, regardless of what's happened to you, is you could either take one of two roads, the road of victimization or the road of overachiever. So we end up seeing a lot of our high-capacity leaders really moving down that road because they don't have their tolerance for hard and their tolerance for stress is really high. So the ability to be able to take on larger capacity leadership roles is a more common path for many leaders. So we're just trying to draw attention to that trauma link and to say a healthy, wholehearted leader is one who's actually addressed their trauma and hasn't just shoved it in a corner and shut the door and said the past is in the past.
You know, one of the people you quote early on is Kurt Thompson, who's been on the program with us a couple of times, Anatomy of the Soul. Even though you cannot change the events of your story, you can change the way you experience your story. And we know enough about brain studies now, and again, I'll call on both of you as experts in that area, to know that if you already are dealing with a fair amount of trauma, or we'll get into shame in just a minute and a number of others, that there isn't as much, if you will, capacity, Jeff, to address some of those issues. So you see some individuals, even with PTSD, that get it because they already came with a lot of trauma. Others that go through the exact same set of circumstances in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever it might be and don't come out with PTSD. So a lot of it is how you deal with the past, but most importantly, what you think about your past. Since you can't change your past, you can at least move forward. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, one of the things that we've come to appreciate is just the way God designed our brains. And yes, when we experience trauma, he's created the ability for our brains to be healed in that. The neurobiology and the neuroscience, as you indicated, is profound. For us as believers in Christ, we're just seeing the secular science and science all around on both sides of the coin, if you will, really affirming God's design. Neuroplasticity is very real. And through therapies like EMDR and neurofeedback, both two of the highest and most successful therapies for those that have experienced severe trauma in wartime scenarios and first responders, they are able to really be healed in sometimes in moments from reacting with triggers from events and things that come from their past. It's profound. So you're absolutely right. When it comes to individuals and leaders, that's a trend that we've noticed in the last 2 decades. So many of them, high-capacity leaders at the top of their org charts, have experienced some traumas in their early childhood lives. And they chose, as Tara indicated, the pathway, many of them, to say, well, we're not going to be victims here. We're going to overcome. But they buried it as if they could and overcame it with achievement that was, of course, nurtured and celebrated wherever they were, in or outside the church. Achievement in and of itself is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
But if we're using that to hide or to push things away and distance ourselves from things that are unmet and unresolved, we are leaking. And whether we know it or not, a leader is leaking in those situations. And in many cases, leaders themselves don't know that they are, but those in their wake, whether it's their spouse or their kids or their colleagues or their peers, they see it. And that's the nature of a blind spot, right? And we can't see it for ourselves. And so that's one of the vulnerabilities or symptoms that all leaders our vulnerable too is the blind spots. And for many leaders, high capacity ones, a blind spot is believing that their past is in the past and doesn't impact their present, or certainly won't impact their future. You've heard that, I'm sure, many times.
Yes, and one of the chapters is on blind spots, but let me just mention real quickly, as you go through the chapters, there's always a section at the end on key markers, in this case, key markers of trauma and triggers, and then antidotes. But let's, if we can, maybe go to you, Terra, because guilt and toxic shame, if only they knew, because some of that gets back to hiding the trauma or other shameful issues, and that certainly relates both to men and women, but you certainly have seen it with some of the women that you've worked with, haven't you?
Absolutely. I've seen it across the board with men, women, children, teens. You know, shame is that message that tells us that I am bad. It is attacked on my identity and my personhood versus guilt, that sense of ownership and conviction over a behavior I've done. And I love that about our faith and what Christ has done is that our identity is apart from what we do. And yet we still have to face our behaviors. And a lot of the behaviors or coping strategies, unhealthy coping strategies, are to really numb out, to try to cover up the pain and the guilt and shame that we feel about who we are, and that voice that's saying, I am bad, something's wrong with me, and if they knew I did this, acted this way in secret, or maybe in public, then I wouldn't be loved or liked or respected. So there is a lot of that going around, especially with those in leadership, because that achievement gives us great dopamine fixes, which is a feel-good hormone, and it helps us to keep people at bay. But as we let people into our inner life, people who can help us to understand that we're loved and known just as we are, then we can really start addressing and own the things that we feel guilty about and have some repair in that.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation as we talk about this new book, Shrinking the Integrity Gap Between What Leaders Preach and Live. And Jeff and Terra Mattson with us. And again, we're talking about how people can, in those leadership positions, which includes almost all of us here, learn to trust God and to address these issues of trauma, shame. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of these others, compartmentalization, narcissism, blind spots, isolation, just to mention a few. But as we have mentioned today, this is Giving Tuesday. So if you have been appreciating some of the conversation we've had in the previous hour or this conversation as well, as we try to help you address issues in your life, hope that you'll visit the website, which is pointofview.net. And today is Giving Tuesday. You can click on that banner to give today, and your gift will be certainly greatly appreciated and allow us to continue bringing these kinds of programs to you. We look at news, we look at information. We certainly spent an hour doing that, and now we're talking about something that will help you and your family, especially if you're in a position of leadership, and most of us are leaders. So let's learn what we can, and we'll continue our conversation right after this.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Jeff and Terra Mattson. The book is entitled Shrinking the Integrity Gap, published by David C. Cook. And we have a link to livingwholeheartedly.com. And before we're done, we'll talk a little bit about opportunities for personal coaching and counseling, maybe dealing with organizational development, some of the workshops, retreats, and of course, some of that has been limited by the pandemic. But of course, I think we're coming out of that in the future. So that is just another great resource. And you can find that at the website, pointofview.net. You might be able to find this book in your local bookstore, but if not, we've given you an opportunity to get it in hardback or Kindle. And I thought, Jeff and Terra, let's, if we can, talk about maybe a couple of the other toxic issues that are certainly, if you will, symptoms of integrity gaps. And one that really struck home to me was Chapter 5 about escapism and compartmentalization. It's got the subtitle, I love this, Everybody Loves Me Outside My House. Over the years, I've had a chance both in colleges, seminaries where I teach, going to various groups, going to various churches, as well as just doing this talk show over the many decades now, of meeting individuals. And then you meet the family, and then sometimes you'll have somebody say, well, it must really be fun to have a dad like that. And they all look around and they start looking at their shoes, kind of like, no, we really don't. You may like him, but we don't like him. And it really gets into something which I've unfortunately seen, Jeff, too often, that everybody loves the pastor, everybody loves the business leader, except the people at home that have to live with him every day.
Yeah, that's unfortunately an all too common narrative, like you said, and you've been around the block to see enough of that. And we think that there needs to be something done about that. And it begins with us trying to live and practice this, what we preach. And this is a great positive deterrent for our own marriage, for our own family, right? This message in writing this book. And escapism and compartmentalization is it's revealing something that leaders are vulnerable to. And the longer that they're in leadership and as their influence grows, the temptation to fall into this and to become comfortable with this kind of mentality of needing to separate home from work or home from other sort of sources of fulfillment grows, and a leader becomes even more vulnerable to it. So, we think that more energy can be conserved when a leader is deciding that they want to be the same person wherever they go, that their behaviors are congruent and have integrity, and in any environment that they're in. Now, nobody does that perfect. Only Christ himself didn't have that integrity gap, but there's tremendous freedom and energy that comes so that we can recoup when we're not trying to be different in different spaces. And that goes against the cultural narrative that all of us have lived under for decades and decades, which is, that success really is, and the world teaches us that how good we are at managing the different hats we wear, the different roles we play. And that just is not a biblical view of success. Success, and I think is a part of it, is actually living and being the same person congruent in wherever you are, and giving, right? Serving others, and rather than trying to self-protect or keep up an image. And what an amazing thing. It's like a barometer, isn't it? When we look at a leader and we look at their family, those that know and love them the most, or we would think, and the leader would say that they love them the most, and you see a different countenance in their faces. And we think that should not be. And it's not about pointing fingers. It's about doing something about it individually and encouraging, inspiring others to do likewise.
Yes. Terra, let me come to you for just a minute, because I thought the chapter on arrogance, but also the one after it, blind spots, kind of go together as a twofer, because what you find is, as you start out that chapter on arrogance, healthy leaders build healthy teams. And I remember the old Proverbs that if you want to go fast, go it alone. If you want to go far, go it with a group. And it seems to me that there are a lot of individuals, and since I have a chance to interview individuals that are political, sometimes I see that more in the political realm, even more so than in the business realm. You can't tell them anything. They think they know it all, and they just aren't very patient. They aren't very good listeners. And that is a problem with a lot of leaders that I've had a chance to meet and interview over the years. What have you found?
Well, it definitely is a common scenario, and I have the temptation myself. I mean, I remember saying to one of my clients who is just a phenomenal business leader in the community, but had no patience for his wife or his 5 children. And I looked at him and I just said, it sounds like efficiency is your mistress. And he and I both, I think I was speaking to myself as well, because there was something inside me that struck that sometimes I can put the task at hand or my way or the efficiency meter at the forefront of the relationship. And it takes time, it takes energy of listening to other people's point of view to actually get to learn who other people are, whether that's in your home or on your team or in our community. As a political leader, it's definitely not the way Jesus went. I mean, Jesus was interrupted all the time. And I'm so in awe as I read the scriptures and I see how he's doing mighty big things, right? And he takes time to slow down and to be interrupted. We tell the story of Jairus, who walks right up to Jesus and says, my son is dying. And then Jesus stops and is interrupted by the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. And his willingness to hold both of their needs and to value both of them, very different places in society. And that is the posture that we're calling for. A leader, a wholehearted leader who has integrity, is willing to see their value, but also to see the value of those that God has placed in their wake of influence and on their team. And it takes an ongoing posture of humility. This isn't something you just arrive at. I think we're always challenged at it. And so definitely being able to evaluate this every so often to say, how am I doing? And maybe even ask the people on my team or in my home, how am I doing with hearing your influence? How am I doing as a listener? It's a hard one for all of us.
One of the things, Jeff, that you, I think, really do very good in that chapter, and you do well in that chapter on blind spots, is sort people out a little bit. I'd never seen this before, but you talk about builders are action people, and those are usually so busy on the action they're not really talking to people. You say merchants are people, and then bankers are detail people, and then innovators are options people. And it's a wonderful diagram. I love diagrams, and it really helps to, in a sense, help us figure out where we are on that, because there are some individuals that are ready, aim, ready, aim, eventually fire. And there are other guys, fire. Oh, I forgot to aim, and so in some respects, you have to figure out your blind spot. And I'm sure even in your team that you have there at Living Wholehearted, you have some people that are really careful, methodical, others that are doers, others, I get the sense that Terra's kind of a task-oriented individual. So each one of those gifts are helpful, but then you need to understand your blind spots in a team, correct?
That's so true. You're referencing a tool that we use. We've used many tools over the years, lots of personality-based indexes and such people are familiar with. And, the core values index is one that we found from another therapist in our about 11 years ago now. And we just put a lot of eggs in that basket because we haven't found anything that's more effective in helping people to understand their unchanging hardwired nature. And it's not a Christian instrument, but this baby's got God's fingerprints all over it. And it's just people resonate with these results when they see them. And you're right, the merchants, the point is, and this really dovetails so nicely with our faith, is it's the body of Christ. And we need each other. God designed us for relationship. He's a God of relationship within himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And he did that on purpose, knowing that we would need one another to thrive and flourish as humans, and that we don't when we start thinking that our little corner, our way is the best. And it is in his nature to be like him and to grow in likeness with him, to learn to look and see the value in others that are wired differently. He made differently so that we could learn to relate and love like He does.
Let's take a break. And again, this is part of their core values index. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to take that myself and learn a little bit more, of course, we have a link to their website, livingwholehearted.com. And of course, we aren't going to be able to cover all 10 of these chapters on symptoms of integrity gaps, but we've looked at quite a number. We come back, maybe we'll pick off another one, especially isolation. I've run into that so often. And for those of us that like to go backpacking, right, even there in Oregon where they live, that's great. But you have to work out some of this in terms of being connected to others. And as I said just a minute ago, if you want to go far, go by yourself. But if you want to go even further and make a difference, then of course you need to do that in the company of others. So what about accountability? What about opportunities to encourage one another? What about the body of Christ? We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and again, if you are finding yourself wanting to know a little bit more, we have a link to the website. The book is entitled Shrinking the Integrity Gap, and it's written by Jeff and Terra Mattson. Let me just also mention that Terra, of course, has written the book Courageous, and you may be familiar with that because of some of the material that we've already talked about here in terms of the work that you can find at livingwholeheartedly.com. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about about that, that is available. And so there are a couple of videos, one on this book, Shrinking the Integrity Gap, one on the idea of creation, courageous girls. So all of that resource is available on our website, pointofview.net, or you can simply go to livingwholeheartedly.com. Let's, if we can, Jeff, real quickly talk about isolation. That is a problem, and it is probably even more of a problem for the men than the women. The women somehow manage to pull together, work with one another. They develop what I call these steel magnolia kind of relationships. But you go and speak to a men's group in a church, and you ask those men, do you have a close friend like you did growing up? And they all look around like, no, I really don't. I mean, I'm just kind of a lone ranger. Of course, even Lone Ranger had Tonto. So this issue of isolation is perhaps one of the biggest problems for leaders, isn't it?
It really is one of the strong vulnerabilities that leaders, really male or female, are at risk. And I would say, generalizing, I think the men in general have a more difficult time being relationally connected. You know, we know just the science from early age. You know, girls are communicating verbally faster and with more people than boys are, and so on and so forth. The trend continues throughout life, and there are other cultural implications and forces at bay that drive males in general to not relate like you're describing. And we just find, we say in our book, in that chapter, when we don't have a relationship in which we experience the safety of being fully known and loved, our fear of rejection often outweighs our desire to be seen. And I think that's a driving force that lies behind many men, and I think of myself in this situation, and it takes vulnerability and intentionality. I mean, those two words, I'll take the latter. Most guys will. But vulnerability is something that we all long for. Every human, no matter what gender you are, male or female, was created to be known and to know others. And if we as men are fighting that, we're doing so at our own peril and our own expense, let alone at the expense of others in our wake.
So again, let's, if we can, Terra, just maybe talk about the hope, because the last chapter really deals with hope for a wholehearted leadership. Some people might say, well, you've identified one of the toxic trends in my life. I'm not sure I can fix this. Lots of times the cliche, I hate it, it is what it is. No, you can change. And give us some hope that we can indeed change some of those things that are affecting us in a negative way.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't believe that we can change. I've seen it a time and time again with some of the most devastating situations, whether it's sexual betrayal, or just a lifetime of hiding and embezzling, gambling, whatever the issues are. Really, it's a starting place of honesty, and it's starting with one or two safe people. Whoever's listening right now, of just wherever you're at in your journey, being able to think about who in your life could you practice with. And that's where us counselors come into play. Sometimes we're the only person for someone to start with, to be able to practice being honest and vulnerable, and then to move out into our community. But that's really where it starts. Integrity is that place of being able to look honestly at where all of who I am is actually at. You know, the truth will set us free, and we have to be truthful about what we're doing with our minds, with our emotions, with our bodies, with our relationships. And the second thing might be to maybe ask those that are most important to you. If you say your wife or your kids are most important, maybe go to them and ask, how am I doing in impacting you? What is the good things and what are the hard things? And being able to start in those places can really send us on a trajectory of a slow and steady shift of changing. It's not a quick fix. This book is not something that we believe is going to be magic in people's lives, and all of a sudden, you know, one moment you're not living with integrity and the next you are. It's a lifetime. It's a process of making choices day in, day out. And really, it just starts with a moment where you say, I'm ready to be honest, and I really want to be who I say I am. And then little by little, day by day, with one or two other safe people, grab this book, start, and in about a year to 2 years, I guarantee you're going to see some shifting happening.
Let me again just encourage you to get a copy of the book. We've only looked at about half of the symptoms of integrity gaps, and of course, even there, we only gave you a brief overlook. So, again, about 280 pages. We also have a link to livingwholehearted.com, and you might also want to pick up the other book that I mentioned in passing, Courageous, Being Daughters Rooted in Grace, and these are some great resources which are available through Jeff and Terra Mattson, and it's been a delight to have you on the program, so I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you so much for having
Thanks,
us.
Kerby.
Great.
We are just about out of time, and let me just mention tomorrow we're going to get back into some other issues in the news, but I thought just in the last few minutes that we have left, I would encourage you to find some of the material for them on the website at pointofview.net. You can also find my commentary today on Viewpoints, calling for and dealing with this issue of defund the police and the fact that it was not only devastating in terms of the impact that it had on the political careers of some individuals, but it also has had a devastating impact on the lives of individuals where defund the police actually started to be implemented. So I wanted you to know about that and to recognize that these are some issues we try to address every single day here on Point of View. My commentary yesterday, for example, dealt with the catchphrase, without evidence. How many times have we heard that? You know, the president said without evidence, and all sorts of statements are being made now without evidence. And you're like, no, I think there is evidence. And just the fact they didn't mention doesn't mean there isn't evidence. And, of course, the catchphrase is only used in one direction. It was so intense that even a couple of months ago, the editor for National Public Radio wrote a column about that, in some respects noticing that even her fellow reporters were using it too often and in inappropriate ways. Sometimes when you disagree with somebody, it doesn't mean they don't have evidence for it. It just means you disagree with their perspective or the evidence that they cite. But this phrase has gotten overused too much, and I've suggested that maybe it's time to get rid of it. And it just, again, brings us back to something we talk about on this program so often. And that is just the need for discernment. Where can you go to get news, information, commentary, even in this case, self-help that is going to be helpful to you and help you to see the world accurately? And I hope that you have come to depend on Point of View as a trusted source of news and information. As we've said before, that when you're supporting Point of View, you're not just supporting the radio program, you're equipping all sorts of individuals like you that are hearing this and actually getting some of the tools, the news, the information, the commentary, so that they can also go out and make a difference, that they can perhaps start a ministry, so they can defend the constitutional rights of ours in the courtroom, that they can share the gospel. And so we are encouraging you today, since it is Giving Tuesday, to consider what you might do to support this ministry. And if you appreciate the kind of work that we do here, we would certainly like to have you take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that banner that says Giving Tuesday and make your gift. For those of you that maybe don't have a computer right now or would like to talk to someone, the, of course, call-in line is different than the pledge line. The pledge line is a different number. It is 800-347-5151. It's a little different number. It's the one we use for you to talk to someone to give your pledge. And again, it's 800-347-5151. And it's Giving Tuesday. We thought we would mention it and encourage you to support lots of ministries, your own church, but perhaps even Point of View as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We're going to take a break, and we will see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Whether you like apple, cherry, or banana cream, today is National Pie Day. Speaking of apples, it's also National Eat a Red Apple Day and World Trick Shot Day. It's also the National Day of Giving, or Giving Tuesday, one day when you can celebrate and support the work of Point of View Radio, something as American as apple pie. Okay, seriously, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, 2020 has been the best of times and the worst of times. A year of challenges, also a year of great victories. You've enabled Point of View to reach a lot of people, including many new listeners who've been working from home. Today, you can help keep that momentum going into the new year by taking part in this national celebration. Okay, yes, you can eat an apple and some pie, or maybe apple pie, but also please give. Give generously at pointofview.net/donate or by phone 1-800-347-5151. Celebrate truth and support it. Pointofview.net/donate and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.